Now can you hear me? Can you hear me now, folks? Excellent. Okay, let's get started. Thank you so much for coming to our training webinar series through CCAR called Developing Culturally Aware and Responsive Recovery-Oriented Systems of Care. If you take a look at that little image up in the right-hand corner, it really speaks to recovery-oriented systems of care and the elements that are critical to the process, especially in peer recovery and recovery coaching. You know, I appreciate the fact that recovery-oriented systems of care are strength-based. They are recovery or person-centered. They're peer-focused, peer-to-peer helping. They're individualized. Community is involved. Family is involved. And that little bottom to the right-hand side arrow says culturally responsive. Good morning, Dion. We're really going to look at this whole concept of being culturally aware and culturally responsive. If you've ever been in trainings with me, you know that I'm not an advocate of cultural competence, because in many ways I think that's a difficult concept to practice. But clearly you'll see the concept of cultural competence come up, and I'm much more interested in our ability to develop cultures that are competent enough to receive us all. Okay. Yes. Not sure what's going with Dion. I'll give her a chance to see if she can connect with us. Otherwise, I'll need to move on. Okay. Let's see where we're going today in this next hour. Over the next hour, we're going to describe some dimensions of culturally responsive helping. And this really comes out of my own efforts to understand me in environments that aren't always very comfortable embracing or caring. We're going to recognize that culturally responsive practices, what they look like at the organizational, personal, and instructional levels. We're going to identify the role of culture, prejudice reduction, and knowledge construction, building awareness, building knowledge in creating culturally responsive helping environments. We're going to make an honest effort to develop an understanding of collaborative, caring, and social action models as they may apply to practicing transforming cultures. And that's really what I would hope you would think about as we, do this work. How do we begin to transform cultures to the point that people can get what they need? Again, one of the core pieces of work that we do in peer recovery support is to remove obstacles and barriers to the recovery process. And in many ways, if cultures aren't accepting and receiving and caring, that can be a very difficult prospect. So I'm hoping that this work that we do today will give you some more ideas and concepts on how to begin to really impact the cultures that we live in, we work in, and we make an honest effort to engage recovery's processes in. Any thoughts about any questions or thoughts about where we're going? Okay, let's move on then. I love this diagram because it comes out of the ability to think about occupational helping and occupational therapy. Occupational science research out of Southern California, I think really fits the model of recovery occupations that support care. When you look in the middle, occupation is about daily living. What do I do day to day? What do I do in the process of recovery? And what are the elements that feed what I do? So if you look at the occupations of recovery, if you look at occupation from this image, at the top it's health and well-being. There are health disparities and cultural influences on health and recovery. There are ethics and society and social justice issues to be addressed. Rehabilitation science speaks to the fact of treatment. Engagement, activity, and neuroscience are part of this process. Clearly, community reintegration and social participation are critical, and family life is critical. So when you look at the core concepts that are presented in an occupational science paradigm or framework, I think it fits well relative to when we look at recovery. And I use this in my work with people that I make an effort to help. Any thoughts or questions about this diagram or this image? Image in and help me to hear what you see. Help me to hear if this fits how you think about occupations that support care. And the key concept, folks, is occupations. How do we help ourselves? How do we help others to occupy time in a way that matters? Thoughts, feedback, any questions? Lost my audio? Hello, can people hear me? Okay. How about you, Stacy? Okay, great, 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 great. Any questions or thoughts about this image? I love the fact that you walk away with these PowerPoints, and I want you to continue to think about and image in and turn these concepts over in your head, and at some level add them to what you are doing. I'm big on promoting balance. That's a good way to think about it, Beth. It's really a holistic approach. It's really about looking at the aspects of living that impact a person's life and living. Okay? Okay. Is everybody else hearing me as well? I've got Beth typing, and I'm hoping that everyone else hears me. I'm not sure what's going on, Stacy. My microphone is green, and it's showing the little um, waves, so that gives me a sense it's coming. Okay. Okay. Well, as long as I can be heard, that's important. And Denise, I hear, but there's a big lag in my typing as well. Okay. Okay. Let's look at another image. Thinking about culture, and just to get us on the same page, think about culture as the integrated pattern of human thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions of a racial, ethnic, religious, or social group. Integrated pattern of human thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions of a racial, ethnic, religious, or social group. Makes sense for people. Can you embrace that description of culture? What would you like to add to it? How do you think about culture? What is culture? How do you describe culture to a recovery? How do you describe culture to my 10-year-old grandson? Then they go on to describe cultural competence as a set of congruent behaviors. And congruent simply means in agreement or harmony. A set of harmonious behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together as a system, agency, or among professionals and enable that system, agency, or professionals to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. Competence implies having a capacity to function effectively. Competence speaks to the possession of required skill, knowledge, or the capacity to offer us an opportunity to function effectively in working with others. Thoughts or comments about either culture or cultural competence? How do you think about these two descriptions? I've got Deanna and Beth typing. Great. I'm especially impacted by competence, meaning our having the capacity to function effectively with others. I think the critical nature of functioning effectively is how do we function functionally in dysfunction? I work with people who are in pain. Dysfunction means living with pain. So if competence implies the capacity to function effectively, how do we function effectively when lives and systems and communities can be so dysfunctional? I think that's the greater, the broader concept to think about when we're thinking about our ability to respond to culture, respond to individual needs, to respond to a person's life on life's terms. There does seem to be a big lag in the typing. I've got a couple of people typing. Let's see what comes through. So for me, the interaction is critical. This is good, but when I think of my own cultural competence, I feel like I don't know what that should look like. So I'm always trying to fit it in order to function, in which I am not truly being myself. I would suggest, Deanna, that you find what's comfortable for you. And I'm hoping that this webinar will offer you an opportunity to really think about what works for you. What I'm sharing works for me. If this is good, then think about how do I begin to uh, put myself in a position where I can respond well enough. Uh, When you say I feel like I don't know what that should look like, struggle not to should on yourself. It looks the way it works for you. And this is so much about making this your own. This is so much about bringing your experience, because that's the value that we have as peer-to-peer helpers. We bring our experience, strength, and hope to others, and we make an honest effort to help them and to care about them. So, when I think about, and that's why I sort of stray from the word cultural competency, because it puts us in a position where we think we have to be or do a certain way, when in reality, it's not so much about the doing, it's what I am being when I'm sitting with another person who is living with pain or looking to change the quality of their lives or the quality of their relationships. And again, Recovery Coach Academy helps us to think so much about it is about the relationships. And that's place one that I come from. But thank you so much, Deanna, for sharing that. That's a helpful thing to think about. Got a couple of typings coming through. You remind me in your comment about cultural competency, I feel like I don't know what that should look like. It reminds me when I was first embracing the work of understanding myself as a racial being in this country. So much of that challenge was I didn't know what I didn't know. And it was hard to be a part of the solution when I didn't know what I didn't know. And I had to be myself in order to know what I needed to know. I had to start with me first and see where I fit in the cultures that I was making an honest effort to learn and grow and live in, to be able to have that comfort zone of being able to be who I wanted to be. I feel like I functioned functionally in dysfunction because that's all I knew. I work well with my peers, but I suffer when it comes to working with a team. Yeah, and we're going to expand upon that concept. Let's see how this works for us. Let's move on and add some more elements to our learning. But again, Deanna, keep teasing that out with me because that's why we're here. Keep teasing out your ability to work well with your peers and yet your ability to work well with a team that's helping your peers, I would imagine, is such a critical part of relationship building and relationships that work. And for me, that's the essence of our ability to develop cultures that work for us all. What do you see? We're talking about culture. We're talking about functioning functionally and dysfunction. This is a white bison image, and the term functioning functionally and dysfunction comes from one of their leaders, Don Coyhis. And look at the image that you have here, because this is an important image when you think about what we are challenged to do in our efforts to help our peers. In many ways, this is an experience of culture. And when you look at the trees are people, and the people have labels, and the people have roots that dig deep into their soil. And look what's in that soil. That's the dysfunction that we're talking about. That's the work of developing competent cultures, given the nature of the anger, the guilt, the shame, the fear, the overall pain that people are living with. And this really base is related to racial and ethnic groups. Any thoughts about this image? One of my favorites, because it really helps me to get a sense of the challenge. And the challenge is what we see as Hispanic, as in gender, and white, and mixed, and black, and Asian, Native American, impaired. Those roots go into soil that doesn't necessarily have people feeling comfortable or safe or able to function. Another one of my favorite images, an integral map of community. And here integral means comprehensive, inclusive, balanced, not leaving anything out. It gives you 4 quadrants. There's the inner individual, which is the psychological and spiritual aspects of an individual human being. There's the outer individual, where they come into contact with physical and behavioral relationships and systems. There's cultural, which talks about worldview, shared meaning, collective norms, shared attitudes, values and beliefs, shared vision and goals, stories, myths, shared history, customs, shared language, symbols, art. Co-creativity, that's a critical piece to this concept of cultural responsiveness. I am someone who works to co-create problem solving with peers that I work with. And then there's a culture of participation and contribution. How do we help people participate and contribute to the environments that they're looking to live and grow in? And then there are the natural and social systems that are many of the systems I think that Deona, you're talking about, the ability to come together with others and manage within the system. So, the inner individual, the outer collective, and the inner collective is a map that I like to start with, because it just gives you the nature of the work that we're looking to do. It's not just about the inner person, it's also about our ability to impact the outer as well as the inner collective. Any thoughts or comments on this diagram? For me, it's a very powerful image. It's a lot to embrace, but it's embraceable. It really speaks to when we talk about recovery being holistic. It's physical, mental, social, emotional, spiritual, social. I mean, it's everything that impacts the individual as they are living through life and working through living. And it also demonstrates the importance of a great learning must occur. In my own experience, both as my own recovery process as well as my honest effort to help others in their process, I've had to pay attention in these areas. I've had to pay attention to what's going on in these areas for people. And I have had to pay attention to what's going on in these areas for people as I am working with people. Again, there can be so many blocks and barriers contained in these environmental factors that I think a diagram like this helps me to better understand what's in front of us. Any thoughts or questions on this diagram? Again, I enjoy spending an hour with you, but I enjoy more the fact that I'm giving you resources to walk away with and continue to think about. And as you continue to think about them, ask whatever you need from me, even after this is done. Because I'm open to learning what you're learning from what I've learned. This is very challenging because the professionals I work with seem to not embrace these values, so I had to work just as hard with them as I did with clients. That's the nature of our ability to impact environments, Deona. That's the nature of our responsibility as much as we can to educate the systems that we are making an effort to help people engage in and grow in and improve the quality of their lives in. and improve their well-being within. And it is hard work, but it's important work. Again, very thank you for the comment. Thank you for teasing this out in your own head. It helps us to understand as well, Deanna. I appreciate there's a lag in your typing, Beth. I see your typing. I'll give you an opportunity to get it through to me. Okay, gotcha. Cultural self-awareness, much like we did in the first exercise in Recovery Coach Academy, the first exercise spoke about who am I? It's critical that I know who I am. And this goes back to your comment, Deanna, not truly being myself. Part of knowing who you are is who are you? What are the cultures, more than one, do you belong to? And what are the characteristics of the cultures you belong to? How do your cultural connections impact your way of being in the world? And that was a critical one for me to tease out before I could really feel effective, because so many of my own internal blocks were related to my fears, my pain, my experiences in a culture that didn't necessarily embrace who I was as a human being or those who look like me as a human being. So it's important that you have a clear awareness, a clear self-awareness of who you are, the nature of the cultures that you belong to. What do those cultures embrace? What are the characteristics of those cultures? And how do those characteristics and that embracing of that culture impact how you are in the world? I think in many ways, again, Deanna, that's a part of my responsibility to know me in the nature and in the context of who I'm helping and how I'm helping and who I am working with to offer that help. That's my responsibility. That's where a lot of that great learning occurs when I think about the 4 laws of change. So in many ways, Deanna, you're onto something. It is about your ability to, sure, it's one thing to help recoveries. It's another thing to help the systems, organizations, and teams that are part of my helping recoveries. Good work to do. And I encourage you to spend some time with this slide after the webinar. There's a lot of information in there for you to help you know you to help others and to not be a block or irresponsive or not responsive to cultures beyond one's own. SAMHSA's working definition of recovery for mental disorders and or substance abuse disorders states that recovery is culturally based and influenced. Culture and cultural background in all of its diverse representations, including values, traditions, and beliefs, are keys in determining a person's journey and unique pathway of recovery. The unique pathway of recovery. Because I did not feel embraced. I've struggled to embrace myself. While working with the systems and teams, I was left confident and felt an enormous amount of fear when I wanted to speak my own ideas and opinions. I can hear you there, Diana. That's your growth. That's the middle leg of that stool that I want you to work real hard on. You can actively listen all you want. You can ask good questions all you want. If I'm sitting there with my stuff weighing me down, if I'm sitting there with my stuff impacting my ability to feel valued, to feel included, to feel as if I'm a part of a team, that's my work to do. That's my organization's work to do. I would suggest that you work hard to overcome your fear and ask for what you need. This is about culture. Your values, your traditions, your beliefs are key to this process. And a part of, I think, the work that you're talking about, Deona, is that services should be culturally grounded, attuned, sensitive, congruent, and competent, as well as personalized to meet each individual's needs. Any team that's working together and is focusing on recovery and focusing on helping people to improve the quality of their lives and their well-beings can be encouraged to embrace this concept, can work to embrace this concept. Part of speaking your own ideas and opinions, Deona, is to share this concept, this paradigm, to help people to see that this is a definition of recovery that you're working from, and the importance of feeling included and inclusive. At the end of the webinar, you'll see a model that's developed out of my own work that really makes an honest effort to challenge that concept and to work with that concept. Okay? Because the diagram again, and when we talk about building infrastructure, when we talk about impacting the roots being affected by anger, guilt, shame, and fear, the Wellbriety movement, the White Bison Group, in their circle of leaders and elders, shows groups of people, teams of people, seeking to instill principles, values, and laws to begin to do a better job of impacting that soil, impacting the roots that are so being affected. Here we have alcoholic, codependent, mental illness, co-occurring disorders, prison, suicide, drug abuse, domestic violence, substance abuse. This is the pain that we want to impact. And you see that diagram shows that we impact the pain by bringing together groups of people, teams of people, circles of leaders and elders. As recovery coaches, you are leaders. You are leaders of a process. You lead your own recovery process, if that is what you are about. But you also work hard to lead the process of others. And so I like this diagram because the ability to begin to impact what we saw in the initial diagram, the ability to begin to impact how these trees are affected by their roots. And again, the trees represent images of individuals. It is about instilling principles, laws, and values, which is a part of culture, which is a part of cultural concepts that can come together and produce greater recovery possibilities. What do you see? I love this image as well. I like all my images. That's why I share them. But think about culture shock. The initial attitudes that we have are openness and acceptance or trust relative to cultural differences, or suspicion, fear, and prejudices. Think about your situation, Deona. The fear that you may have in being different within that setting that you're working with. You can be open to that, accepting of that, or trusting of that, or you can be suspicious of that, fearful of that, and prejudice related to that. And think about how that has impacted your ability to be who you are. Think about how it's impacted probably your ability to have this team work in collaboration with your efforts. Some of the inevitable reactions that we have to cross-cultural encounters and impacted by cultural differences might be frustration, confusion, tension, or embarrassment. Some of the coping strategies, which are the choices that we have, might be to observe, listen, and inquire, or criticize, rationalize, or withdraw. And those are reactive responses. When I react, I'm not acting out of who I am. I'm not acting out of the values and the principles that I feel are important to impart in this process of recovery. So again, it's about me learning how to be in these situations where there might be culture shock. And think about culture shock also in relation to the organizations and the agencies that you are working within, the team or the support teams that you might be working within. Organizations have a culture, teams have a culture, a way of being, a way of living and working or not working together. So again, when we look at this concept of culture shock, what results of the coping strategies of observing, listening, inquiring are rapport and understanding. The results of criticizing, rationalizing, withdrawing, the reactive responses might be alienation and isolation. And Deanna, think about that. Do you experience alienation and isolation when you don't feel that the team that you're working with is truly embracing the concepts, the issues, the experience of who the recoveries are that you're working with? I know there are lags. Any thoughts or concepts? Any questions? And I'm hoping this is helpful for people because it's an opportunity for us to really think about. I'm hoping some things in a different way. I'm going to move on. I'm going to pick up Deanna's response because I think, oh, I did not aspire. Yes, I was isolated and criticized. I hear that, and that's the unfortunate result. So you can see that this culture shock diagram does have some validity. Sorry to hear about that, but I'm glad you're still hanging in here. So when you think about this concept of cultural responsiveness, it refers to healthcare services that are respectful of and relevant to the health beliefs, practices, the culture and linguistic needs of diverse recovery populations and communities. That is, those communities whose members identify as having a particular culture or linguistic, i.e. language affiliation by virtue of their place of birth, ancestry or ethnic origin, religion, preferred language, or language spoken at home. How do we respond to communities and individuals is so much of what cultural responsiveness is about. I think cultural competence speaks to having skills, knowledge, and capacity. I see cultural responsiveness speaking to how do we respond with those skills, knowledge, and capacities that we are acquiring as we begin to better understand culture and the breadth of culture and the impact of culture. Again, folks, a clear reminder, because it was my experience in my own initial recovery process, it's a clear block to the initial, probably, I would say, the initial 20 hospitalizations that I had because people did not respond to my culture in a way that was helpful. And at that point, my culture was not only the relationship with substance abuse, but my culture was African American. My culture was having been a Yale graduate. My culture was having gone to law school. My culture was living with a mother who experienced lynchings about the same time I was born. So she had a lot of fear of the world. My response to, how do I not feel isolated or criticized and still make my way in this world? That's, for me, the critical nature of cultural responsiveness. Cultural responsiveness describes the capacity to respond to healthcare needs of diverse individuals and communities. The capacity to respond to the healthcare needs of diverse individuals and communities requires knowledge, abilities, and skills at different levels of intervention. This again speaks to what you were speaking about, Deanna. Individual, systemic, professional, and organizational. This is what this is about, folks. It's not just about me being culturally responsive. It's about my organizations, the systems that we're working within, the professionals that we work with, to be equally culturally responsive. A lot of cultural competence training has gone on, and yet we're still not responding in ways that I think demonstrates care, both as the service that it is projected to be, but also the attitude. Cultural responsiveness instills the attitude of care that's so critical to the process. I've got Deanna typing. I will pick you up when it comes up. This is a diagram that I developed when I thought about care allies. And again, care allies are those people who are willing to work with me on behalf of recovery, willing to work with me on behalf of recoverees. They're aware of their power. They're culture responsive. They're able to respond to the needs of all recoverees. They are respectful. They acknowledge their privilege, if they do have privilege. They're realistic. Well, your attitude of care was seen as emotional until I should not feel. Interesting. Somebody shooting on you. I think you have to make the choice and the decision what your attitude of care embraces, how you put that attitude of care into the world. And again, I'm talking about allies. Obviously, there weren't very many allies there for you. And I would encourage you to continue to seek allies. My initial allies are the recoveries that I work with. Um, okay. Take care of yourself, Beth. I appreciate that. No problem. So a care ally for me is aware of their power, shares their power, is culture responsive, is able to respond to the needs of the recovery, is able to respond to the system blocks and barriers to recovery, is respectful, acknowledges their privilege, is realistic in support. And this is hard work, folks. This is, again, the relationship building that must occur as we make this honest effort to provide environments that are competent enough, caring enough, harmonious enough to receive us all. And that's the challenge. It goes back to that forest. We're all living in that forest, and those roots are deep. But I don't give up because recoveries are worth it. My recovery is worth it. It speaks to that great law of change. Change must be preceded by a great learning. And I engage allies who are willing to learn. And they're there, folks. They're out there. It's just a question of engaging them. Whoosh. This is the cornerstone of the work as I see it and the work that I've been doing over years in my effort to be more culturally competent initially, culturally sensitive initially, culturally responsive now. This is an image that I gained off of the internet, and I built on it in an effort to utilize this model. And we're going to spend a few minutes with this. And I'm hoping that people can engage with me and work with me around this concept. And again, think about it in relation to some of what you in particular have talked about, Deanna, and I'm hoping some others have been thinking about. When you look at the core components of culture responsive helping, as I speak about it, it's inclusive, it's competence, it's attitude, and it's meaning. I've tried to put this in a way that you can use it. I've tried to put this in a way that makes sense for you to think about it, but help me to know if it works for you. When we talk about inclusion, we're talking about respect and connectedness. Establishing inclusion, ways to establish inclusion are routines and rituals, are respectful interactions. And that not only includes our interactions with recoveries, but our interactions with teams and others that we are working with in our efforts to help recoveries. Establishing inclusion means that recoveries are comfortable in the setting that we're helping them in. Their life, their language, and their cultures are respected. That's what inclusion entails. I think we talk about inclusion, but for me, let's detail it. Let's really embrace it by beginning to take a look at what it might look like. And again, for me, this isn't the end all or be all, but it's how I've come to think about establishing inclusion. Any thoughts or comments on establishing inclusion as a part of a framework for culture responsive helping? We've got some time, so I'm looking at Beth as typing. I'm going to give her see if a chance will come through for us. Now Dion is typing as well. I'm hoping this is, the elements of this to have inclusion. I've had to get comfortable letting go of any assumptions and get real comfortable asking questions. Yeah. Beth, it goes back to the way to wisdom, as Agis Aryan speaks about it, is to be open to the outcome and not attached to it. Letting go of my assumptions, working in that middle leg of the stool is my ability to understand and manage my stuff, but also let go of my stuff in the midst of helping others. Mine too. That's the way to wisdom. The way to wisdom, the way of the teacher, as Andres Arian, the cultural anthropologist who has inspired me and given me so much of an awareness of how to function, how to, where the White Bison Group speaks about functioning functionally in dysfunction, Andres Arian's work is paraphrased as walking a spiritual path with practical feet. Walking a spiritual path with practical feet. And so when she speaks about the way to wisdom, the way of the teacher, which is what we are as helpers, she speaks about be open to the outcome, not attached to it. Great, Deanna. Let's talk about competence, which is authenticity and effectiveness. And it gets back to what you spoke about, Beth, getting real, being authentic and effective. We stimulate competence by clear criteria for success, fairness and honesty, being recovery-centered, being recovery-driven, not organization-driven, not, pathway-driven. It's reality-based action. Gets back to what you talked about, Beth. Getting real. Reality-based action, reality-based comfortability with asking questions, multiple pathways to solutions. Recoveries, creating a belief that recoveries are effective learners and doers. That's stimulating confidence. That's stimulating competence. Being authentic, being effective, being real, being confident in my ability to help. I got Beth typing. I'll pick up on her typing. Let's look at choice and personal relevance, which speaks to attitude. Culture responsive helping speaks to developing a positive attitude, i.e., focusing on the recovery's experience, concerns, and interests, encouraging choices related to the recovery's experience, values, needs, and strengths. My ability to, what this speaks to, and again, one of Andres Arian's circles, is the way of the caretaker, the way to love, or the way of care. And for her, she speaks about paying attention to it as heart and meaning for the recovery. That's how I see that piece on attitude. I think in our organizations, in our larger settings, many times, they provide services of care well enough, but the attitude of care isn't as good. It's a natural thing to categorize ourselves and others. It's a part of how we establish identity. However, I've worked with clients who, for their own reasons and stuff, would have been easy to make a barrier, us versus them. It's important to remember and remind people that I may not fit into some of their cultures, but I can be a huge part of their recovery culture. Well stated. I like that concept. I'm going to use that because you've introduced another piece of this action, Beth, another piece of this paradigm. It's so much about, and hear this loud and clear, Deanna, because I think you're seeking to make this happen as well. We're looking to help develop a recovery culture. As you leave this webinar, think in your own head, what does that look like? Too often, cultures are barriers rather than inclusions. Yes, emergency rooms and hospitals. Not in my emergency room is a statement of a barrier versus an inclusion. People may get the service of care at some point in those hospital settings, but the attitude of care, pardon my French, sucks. So many times, cultures are barriers rather than inclusions is a critical thought, concept, issue to be focused on as you walk away from this webinar and think about being more culture responsive in your helping. Cultures can be barriers as well. Think about the internal cultures that recoveries have embraced that may get in the way of their ability to engage in the larger culture. But also think about the larger culture's barriers, and not necessarily always, not always on purpose. So many times it's insidious. People, again, look at the roots of those trees and how much fear and pain and hurt and shame that people have lived through. It makes it very difficult for us to come together. But that really speaks to the last piece of this framework, which is meaning, challenge, and engagement. See, when I think about occupational science speaks to how do we help people have a quality of life, a sense of well-being, so that they have their best opportunity to perform in the occupations of living as well as participate in the occupations of living. If I'm being excluded rather than included, then I'm struggling to participate. So enhancing meaning is active collaboration. It's challenging what is. It's teaching to the recovery's strengths and supporting their excellence. Supporting their excellence means that people do some things damn well. And let's appreciate that's where their strengths may lie. And let's support that strength that they have. Enhancing meaning is creating challenging, thought-provoking learning and doing. So much of this process, from the individual to the organizations, to the culture, to the interactions, is about learning how to live together. That's what Angus Arian's work is about. That's what the White Bison's group work is about. For me, that's what culturally responsive helping is about. It's helping us to think about how do we include, have attitudes, a sense of competence and meaning that offers our greatest opportunity to learn and live together. For our cultures to be responsive to people who need help, it speaks about balance, harmony, inclusion, the attitudes, the sense of competence, and the sense of meaning. It'd be interesting to run this by a treatment group. It'd be interesting to have a conversation that matters with someone whose paradigm or their framework for helping may be challenged or may struggle to embrace these concepts. But for me, when I saw this image created by Marjorie Ginsburg, it just spoke to me. And again, hers is the image, and the pieces around that image are my own thinking that have come out from a lot of my own efforts to try to function functionally and dysfunction and work as much as I possibly can in both the big A and the small A advocacy roles to help others. Building on that point, something I've had to recognize is the importance of focusing and using my strength in the helping role. We as people would benefit so much from learning to love ourselves, embrace our faults, and focusing on our strengths. Well said, Beth. When I think about soul, it is strengths, overcoming, unmanageability, and limitation. When I came out of the School of Social Work, this concept of soul was in my head. And initially, soul was strengths operating uncovered by love. As I've progressed in my work, as I began to really think about this whole concept that fit my paradigm exactly before I started to think about recovery coaching, it's so much about focusing on strengths. It's so much about knowing who we are and knowing what we bring. That's the work. Strengths overcoming unmanageability and limitation speaks to the fact that, I came to believe that a power greater than myself could help me to overcome. But I also appreciated that I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore my life to sanity. But more importantly, that was about my relationships with people. I'm encouraging power as partnerships. overcoming weakness. Therefore, empowering responsibility. My work is a humble effort to lend power. And power for me is partnerships, overcoming weakness, empowering responsibility. Fiona says, my great challenge is not how well I embrace myself, but what to do when you are not embraced, when your strength is seen as a threat. As long as you don't see your strength as, yeah, I can identify with that. I'm a 6'3" tall black man, and I was seen as a threat when all I wanted to do was help and care. So I can't control those environments outside of me. My greatest ability to be responsive to cultures that may not embrace me is to be as strong as I can. And again, folks, when you talk about partnerships, overcoming weakness, and power and responsibility, that speaks to allies. That speaks to me connecting with people who do embrace a framework similar to this, who do embrace the principles of recovery coaching and working with recoveries. And this is a growing group, folks. There are allies that we haven't even embraced yet. As long as I don't see my strength as a threat, I'm moving forward. If I go to the next page, it's time for questions and comments, but I'll go back and leave that image in front of you. Fiona, I recognize how much is my stuff and how much is their stuff. And I say this to Serenity. Yes! 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 Beth, you're right with me, lady. Look for those allies. Embrace those allies. That's your challenge. It's not about, and Beth, that's great advice. That stool, those three legs of the stool is so critical to this process. And for me, when I think about what has been, because when you look at that, the first stage of recovery really speaks to managing anxiety. And I think Beth has just given you a great tool, and that's the same tool I use, the Serenity Prayer. It helps me to manage my anxiety. I say it lots of times in my head, God grant me the serenity to accept the people, places, and things that I can't change. Courage to change the things that I can, which is me and how I think about those people, places, and things, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so much of that wisdom to know the difference means I'm open to the outcome of what I experience in the world, but I don't let it stick to me, and I don't attach myself to it. And the Serenity Prayer has been a very powerful resource in being able to make that happen. I think it's a very powerful resource as you move forward in working to be more culture responsive. And I think Beth is giving us the clue. It's been a long journey for all of us. And that's where the allies come in. It's so much about, what does 12-step recovery say? Sticking with the winners. We're going to be winding down. I want Beth's comment to come through. And any other comments or questions relative to what we've done over the last hour? I hope this has been helpful, folks. I was telling Stacy I was really looking forward to doing this particular webinar because it's a part of my learning over 20-odd years of really facing myself as a racial being, as a person who was different in this world. And not only was it my race, it was also my educational background, the Yale culture that was how it was impacting me, the culture and the family that I came out of that was more fear-based and worrying about weaknesses versus being strength-based. So I think I want to get a sense. What are you walking away with? What are you taking away from this particular webinar? And please do take the PowerPoint with you and continue to think about it. And if you want to ask questions related to it, I'm reachable at soulhelp@me.com. Again, to me, collaborative learning is the way to go. I'm a learner, I'm a doer, I'm a teacher, and I so much want to know what you know. Yep, strength-based versus fear-based. That's the challenge. That's what recovery coaching is about when you look at it. Thank you, Stacy. Deanna, keep working at it. You got it. That middle leg of the stool, keep working at it. We all keep working at it. And find collaborative learning environments that can help you to work on it. That's the key piece. Collaborative learning environments. That's how we continue to grow and learn and be more culturally responsive in our helping. I look forward to you as well. Thank you for engaging in this process, folks. Stacey and I were saying it's best when it's interactive, and again, I feel blessed. Denise, thank you as well. Hope to see you again soon.